So my name is Joyce. I'm a developer advocate at Postman. I'm actually based in my kitchen right now in San Francisco. So welcome. Trent, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joyce. So as you can tell on the screen, I'm Trent McCann. I'm the engineering manager for quality here at Postman. I am not in my kitchen. I am not in San Francisco. I am actually 100% remote. I'm on the East Coast of Canada for those that are just joining that didn't hear earlier. I've been with Postman, actually, funny enough, exactly 1 year today, to this day. But I've been a Postman user now for, geez, I would have to say I go way back to the days of when it was just a Chrome extension. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, Trent, I knew you before you started working at Postman because you were a pretty big Postman power user.
Yeah, you and I had like lots of conversations, I think, over the years and interviews and things like that, where we've talked lots. And so, it was kind of nice that, we both kind of got in the same place and stuff like that to collaborate. And we're still collaborating today. So it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
And then we swooped you up, and it sounds like you're hiring, you're building out your test team. So if any testers are out there, we'll drop a link to our jobs page in the chat. So just turn your eyes to the chat and look away from us. So let's go ahead and cover some housekeeping issues. If you don't know yet, you are muted. Only Trent and I can talk. We have all the power. You guys are muted. If you have any questions in your Zoom interface, I see a lot of you have found the chat, but there is a section called Q&A in the Zoom interface. So if you have any questions throughout, right immediately off the bat or at the end, just go ahead and ask them real time. We have a whole bunch of other people besides just Trent and myself who are ready and waiting to answer your questions as you have them. A recording of the session will be shared to everyone who registered, so don't worry if you miss something. The slides as well as the recording will be shared with you afterwards. And make sure, I'm sure you're going to be spellbound, stuck to your seats, but at the end we will have a survey, especially if you've been to some of these webinars before. We do take that survey feedback very seriously, and that feeds into making a more worthwhile session for you guys in the future. So those are the housekeeping items. The session is going to be about an hour and 15, an hour and 30 with Q&A. So we'll cover, this is not an intro to testing webinar. So we will briefly review what a test is in Postman, but hopefully you already have a foundation of testing in Postman. And if you don't, you can still follow along and understand some of the more advanced workflows. But just so you know, we are not going to go deep into the syntax or like how you write a test, that kind of thing. So the focus of this is going to be on continuous testing. And we'll explain what that means. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. And then we'll go into some advanced workflows. Trent, you're actually going to be demoing continuous integration, continuous deployment, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a bit of a demo set up for everyone. So anybody that has maybe seen some of our talks before, I've done this demo a few times now, but I think it's fantastic for us to re-demo this, and for anybody that's new to Postman, especially as they're building out their teams and things like that. I think this is fantastic to review and have people go over. So I have some very specifics that I'm kind of digging into, but like from a high level, I think it applies to many people. And of course, we're always here to help. So if you have any questions afterwards, definitely reach out to any of us.
And I've seen your demo before, but I think the last time I saw your demo, I keep picking out little nuggets that I think are useful. So even if you've seen at a high level what CI/CD looks like, I think it's still worthwhile to kind of talk through some of those edge cases. And then if you're new to testing or if you're new to Postman, welcome. We will have some additional resources. So after this webinar, you can, the sky's the limit. And then we will have some time for live Q&A. So remember, if you have questions throughout the webinar, go ahead and use the Q&A section in Zoom, and we'll have our panelists answer some of those questions in real time. But then at the very end, we'll reserve some time for live Q&A. Trent, testing guru, will tell us everything that we need to know about testing.
I'll do my best.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome to Postman. If you thought you signed up for a Postmates webinar, there's still time to get out of here. Otherwise, hopefully you guys all know Postman. We have over 11 million people using it today. I had to update the slide. And for many of us, we know Postman already. This is not an intro to Postman. It's not an intro to testing. Postman's our friendly neighborhood postman. There's a lot of stuff you can do. And if you've come to one of our webinars before, you probably know this diagram. These are the API life cycles, as we like to call them. And on the left, you have the consumer life cycle. So I'm actually a very representative of a consumer an API consumer. I'm in developer relations, so I'm constantly discovering new APIs, learning about them, doing something, and then integrating it into my workflow, whatever I'm building, right? And Trent, you're probably more on the API producer lifecycle. You're involved in defining or designing what that API is going to look like, maybe debugging and testing, and then documenting and monitoring and publishing. So two different life cycles, not that I couldn't jump over to the producer, not that Trent can't jump over to the consumer, but some of these basic workflows that everyone faces. And for today, we're going to focus on, hopefully you can see it, it's very subtle on this slide, but hopefully you can see the specific parts of the life cycle that we'll be focusing on today. For the consumer, it's going to be learn and integrate. For the producer, it's going to be debugging, testing, and monitoring. So lots of the donut that's not lit up here, but for today, we're going to focus on these aspects. And a lot of people say they test in Postman. In fact, I think a lot of times people think of Postman synonymously with a testing tool. So lots of people say they test in Postman, but they actually mean I'm exploring in Postman, right? So testing in Postman is not the same thing as writing a test in Postman. So you can see this aspirational pyramid, the spaceman's flying to the top here. Most people are muddling around on the base, and that's perfectly fine. You could be happy as a clam for the rest of your life if all you're doing is exploring an API. But hopefully you're attending this webinar because you want to level up the pyramid. So we'll very briefly review writing a test, writing out more advanced test suites, different ways to automate it, and then how you can integrate it into your existing workflow with your existing tools. Okay, so you know, testing is not double equals writing a test in Postman. So what is a test in Postman? Okay, let's hop over. I hope I have this right, but let's hop over to Postman and get started. Do you see Postman app? Trent?
I see it.
Okay,
We're good.
Awesome. Okay, this is our friendly neighborhood Postman. I'm in a workspace called continuous testing, and I'm actually sharing this. It's a team workspace that I am, Trent, you're in this workspace as well. If you're following along at home, there's some parts of this demo that I think are worthwhile just to watch, but some parts you can follow along at home. So if you're gonna follow along at home, go ahead and create a nice blank workspace that you can do all of your work in. And the first thing we're gonna do is pull in a template. So go to the top left button, the new, and tab over to templates. And you can go ahead and search for this template, but it's actually the first one right here. So intro to writing tests with examples. Go ahead and click the run in Postman button, and that'll import it in. You can see I already have it imported, so I'm not gonna click it. I'm gonna start and bring it to the top. So this is a template that shows us how to write tests and examples of writing tests. So again, we won't go into basic test syntax, but if you're like, if you've never seen a Postman test, definitely import this template and take a look. There's API tests, there's more advanced tests. So let's go ahead and load up one of these requests. So I'm clicking in the API test folder, a request called status. And if I just hit send, I see my response body on the bottom. Now there's a green dot here next to the test. So I see that something is here. And they just changed this UI recently to make it much more usable, but my stupid muscle memory is still trying to drag the wrong part. Okay, so there's a single test under this tests tab on the top. And this is what a test in Postman looks like. Well, that's the whole webinar. I think we're about done here. Just kidding. This is just a very, very simple test. And in fact, I didn't write this myself. I'm not very good at writing JavaScript or Chai.js, which is the underlying assertion library that Postman is using here. So what you can do is, if you're not very comfortable writing tests yet, here on the right, there's these snippets that allow you to pull in little snippets of JavaScript. So status code, if I place my cursor here, I'll go ahead and insert it. Status code is 200. Boom. Oh, I'm gonna stop saying boom. I wish everyone around me would stop saying that because it's very annoying. Okay, so there you have it, voila. This is a test in Postman. I've just inserted it by clicking a snippet, and you can see here some other popular snippets as well. So the basic structure of a test is pm.test, two parameters. The first one is the name of the test, and the second one is a function with assertions. And if any of those assertions throw an error, then this entire test fails. And in fact, this is where we're writing our test in the top, but on the bottom, where we previously were looking at our response body, you can tab over to test results, and here's the name of our test that ran, response is okay. And yep, we got it 200 okay, and therefore it's a pass.
One thing I want to like touch on, Joyce, I don't know if you're going to like mention this as well, but something that we do get a lot of questions about around snippets specifically is people are asking, can I create custom ones? Because people want to reuse some of them and things like that. The answer currently is no, we can't create custom snippets, but I do believe we have it on our roadmap to eventually add something like that in. I couldn't give a time frame or anything like that, but it is a question I think we do see fairly often in the community.
There is a workaround for that that allows them to reuse some code that I think maybe we'll talk about that next. Okay, well, let's go ahead and, okay, so I'm gonna delete this because this is essentially the exact same test here, but with a different test name. So I'll go ahead and delete that. So you have these two sections here, the pre-request script and tests. And so I called this JavaScript. It might have slipped past you, but these are areas where you can write code that runs before or after this request that we're working on here. And so tests, of course, are afterwards because what we're testing is a response from the server. We're making assertions against the response body, property, status code, like anything that we want to assert, we would write here under tests. But this pre-request script, if I had any kind of setup, I could go ahead and generate variables. I could do calculations and then send that information in our primary request. And then tests, if I want to do any kind of conditional logic, any branching or looping, that's where I would do that here in the test that executes after this main request. Okay, so let's go ahead and touch on one, it's almost a sneak preview, but let's just look at this request. We didn't even look at the request that we're sending. So this is just Postman's echo service that echoes back what you send it. And in this case, we have two query params, foo1 and foo2, with values bar1 and bar2. So when I sent it, I can actually see it just echoes back to me those, it echoes back to me those, oh gosh. It echoes back to me those arguments, right? So I had said earlier that we could generate variables in the pre-request script. We can go ahead and do that. Or we can generate dynamic variables. And you can generate dynamic variables anywhere you want. And I finally learned the syntax for it. It's so easy. But like if we wanted to, instead of sending bar1 string back, we can use, I think the underlying library here is called Faker. Is that correct? It's Faker, a JavaScript library. It is Faker. It's fake. Yep. So the syntax for that is double curly braces just because we're in this text area. And you can go ahead and you can actually see some of these random variables that Postman's saying, did you want to say random abbreviation? And so let's do everyone's favorite. Do you know everyone's favorite dynamic variable, Trent?
I don't know. Like there's so many of them in there though. Like, I don't know what would be.
So
like
this would be a really good spot to generate random names, random address, random email address, UIDs. So if you're hard coding from a test file and then plopping in those values, this is a way that you could just generate random whatever. I'm going to do random BS because that's everyone's favorite. And if I hover over it, you can see it's a random phrase of business speak. So previously we sent bar1. So now we should be generating a dynamic variable on the fly. So let's go ahead and hit send. And we have viral cultivate deliverables. Very random BS, right? So there is a way to, I think that dynamic variables are something that's very, very helpful because I remember when I was testing different user scenarios, I would always have to create different users and be like, it doesn't take that much creativity, but it does take a little bit of extra time. Okay. So you have the pre-request script here, and then you have the tests here. And maybe every single one of your requests returns 200. Do you have to insert a snippet every time that says 200? Do you have to write the same things over and over again? So one thing I will point out is that you can write these scripts at a collection level or at the folder level. So if I go to the collection and click on the 3 dots and click edit, I can go ahead and plop in that test here. And anything that you write at the collection level or at the folder level will run after every single request in that collection or folder. So that's one way that you can reuse some of the same scripts, some of the same variables, some of the same elements, just to keep your code a little bit drier. All right. Anything to say about, anything to add about that?
Nothing on my side. Yeah, I guess, you know, one thing I guess maybe I will say is around like using the Faker JS stuff is fantastic when you're using like larger data sets, and you really do kind of want to like your examples, like, you know, foo and bar and stuff like that, which is kind of our go-to a lot of the time when we're like creating tests, especially quick ones and stuff like that. But if you want to make things like look and seem a little more realistic, using this Faker JS library is fantastic. I know it was something that like I used to fake a lot of before, when I was creating some of these tests and things like that. So once we introduced it, it was really nice. It was really well received by a lot of people that are generating larger sets of data. Before, what I would do is I generate all of this information using, you know, some third-party tools, put it into a CSV file, and then import it in as part of the collection runner, which I know you'll talk about a little bit more here in the future. But yeah, like that's what I used to do. But now that it's like part of our application, it's fantastic. And I think a lot of testers will love it as well.
Yeah, if you already have your test cases that you are that you want to use, you can loop through that external data file, like Trent was saying. Or if you just don't really care, but you want something a little bit more sophisticated, you can use Faker. Okay, so that is, again, lots of different types of tests we could go over, but this is not intro to tests. If you go to the the third folder called integration tests and expand using variables, let's go ahead and load up. Let me go ahead and close some of these just to clean it up a bit. So load up Bitcoin exchange rate. This is an unauthenticated GET request to CoinDesk that returns a JSON object with information about Bitcoin's current price. And if you click under the test tab, you see it's green. There's something under it. Let's take a look. This is just JavaScript, and it's pretty decently commented so we can understand what's going on. We're capturing this response body right here, and we're actually going to set an environment variable called Bitcoin rate. So I already hit send, so I would expect to see in my environment, here's the current Bitcoin rate right here. So all I've done is set an environment variable that can then be used in the next request that I run. So in fact, if I load this up, echo, that's that familiar echo, it's gonna echo back what we give it, and in this case, it's gonna echo back the Bitcoin rate. So go ahead and hit send, and yes, we went, is this an error? Oh, there it is. I'm not dragging it correctly. It's echoing back foo1 Bitcoin rate that we just retrieved in the previous request. So using these environment variables, a lot of times I've seen people when they're using Postman very frequently, they'll send a request, scroll down to the bottom and say, okay, what am I looking for? This one, they'll copy this to their clipboard and then they'll paste it right here, right? So using an environment variable or any type of variable really allows you to then programmatically script that sequence. And what I did was I came here to hit send, and then I came here to this request to hit send. And you can walk through a request flow like that. But I'm going to show you, do you know what I'm going to show next, Trent?
Are you going to unset them, or are we going to talk about how, like, you know, building these variables, like keep your test dynamic and things like that? Or are we going to just like move right into collection run? where are we going with this, Joyce?
So that's the thing. We could go so many different places with this, but yeah. Since I'm the one that's sharing my screen, I will move directly into collection runner. So instead of stepping through each request, which is great when you're writing the test and when you're debugging, but now that I've written my flow, I've written this execution over the course of 2 requests using the tests tab. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and run these 2 tests in waterfall sequence. in waterfall sequence because I wrote the code that way. So if I go to this flyout here and click run, I'm opening this new window called Collection Runner. You know, some people don't know about Collection Runner.
It's funny that people don't, because like it is, I think we consider it a bit of like a staple in our application, but some people kind of view it as a like an advanced function. But I don't know, I just like after a while when you're building collections and stuff like that, it just seems to be like something you use daily, and how I would mostly interact and run my tests. I would never, after a while, run them tab by tab. I would just pop it all in here. And that's where like I kind of get back to that point I was saying about keeping your test dynamic. So using some of the variables like you had set up, Joyce, is fantastic, because then, you know, the information that you're working with changes all the time. So in this scenario here, I think it's fantastic, and it keeps everything dynamic.
So this is kind of a baby collection. I think I had 24 requests or something very small in there. So I can run all 24 requests in boom, 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 waterfall order. But I'm actually just going to run the 2 requests in that folder. And I think it was under integration tests using variables. Yep. So here's my 2 requests. All I did was drill down into that folder, and I can say only run the first one, or go ahead and run them both. And I'm going to run it with this environment, because I did use an environment variable. And if I go ahead and click run, you can see the first request ran, and I did have a test, and the second request ran. And if I was curious, like what the heck ran, you can go ahead and drill down more into that. And the second test that I wrote ran. So in this case, I only have 2 baby requests with 2 baby tests, but the collection runner is how I'm running something a little bit more automatedly. And some people call this automation. We'll explain today better ways to automate, but this is technically automation. You've written your tests and you're running them in sequence. Okay, so let's just go back to the main Postman window. So that's just how you use variables. We also saw how to use dynamic variables with that random BS. There's many other types of variables that you can use in Postman. And then other more advanced testing, like here's a scenario. Now that you know how to chain information, you can create a user. You can create a new item, verify that it exists in your data store. You can add an item to the cart, delete it from the cart, verify the item is removed from the cart. You can draft any kind of scenario that you can think of, real user flows. This is an example of a consumer-driven contract test with setup, test, and teardown. So I know the Postman engineering team uses this format quite a bit, where they put all their setup in folders, just so it's a little bit easier to see, nested folders, and using mocks. So mocking your external dependencies. I know what I'm getting from Bitcoin, but what if Bitcoin goes down? Is it because my tests have failed on my end, on my service, or is it because CoinDesk has gone down? So mocking out what comes back from CoinDesk allows me to be a little bit more sure about what I'm testing. Okay. Anything else to add about that? I didn't want to spend too long on the intro to tests part, but there's a lot of stuff we didn't cover.
Yeah, I think this is pretty good, because it's a good primer, I think, for a lot of our users that, you know, may have not used a lot of Postman or a lot of these kind of features and functionality. Like you say, like some people just kind of go and they make simple calls with Postman and they call it a day. But there's so much more power, obviously, to the application than that. So I think this is a really good like primer for everybody.
Okay, so let's just, whoa. Okay, so we're back in the slides. Hopefully you see this demo slide. We will have a couple screenshots here. So if, obviously we have the recording, but if you're just like, what the heck is a assertion of an API response, we will have these screenshots in the deck for you as well. So we talked about what a test is in Postman, and all that is asserting the API response, making sure the expected response from the server is as you expect it, right? We talked about pre-request and test scripts. And if you're rewriting a lot of the same scripting, you can also use collection level and folder level scripts and variables. We talked about environment variables, but there's collection level, global. We talked about dynamic variables, lots of different variables that you can use for your specific use case, depending on what scope you want. And we already took a look at collection runner, which may or may not equate to automation in your mind. So if you're new to writing tests and you've never written tests before, some resources to get you started besides that intro to writing tests template is the chai.js assertion library. every time I write a brand new test, I have to look at their website because I am not a chai person. So you saw it was actually very pleasant to read. pm.expect.property to have B string or like whatever. It's very pleasant to read, but if you're not familiar with that syntax, check out chai.js. We also saw JavaScript snippets. If you're new to JavaScript or if you're new to Postman tests, just take a look at those popular snippets and then insert them, hit send and see what it does. And we also have Postman sandbox libraries. So we talked about Faker. Faker.js is one of the libraries that's included in Postman, built in. But if you have certain libraries that you like to use, like Cheerio, like say you're testing a web page and you want to scrape stuff off of it, there are certain inbuilt libraries that are that you don't have to require into the Postman scripting areas. And we'll drop a link to that in the chat too, to some of these resources, specifically the Postman docs. Okay. So even though we didn't spend a lot of time on that intro to tests, I did want to point out that most people never break out. Can you see my cursor?
I can see it, yeah.
I made it really big, but this is how I leave my cursor all the time. Most people never break out of this cycle. They're debugging, they're inspecting, and they're exploring, but they never break out of that cycle. As soon as you write a test, as soon as you write a test collection, any kind of flow, maybe you're just running the same test for every single request. As soon as you do that, this enables, this is the building block of automation. Okay, so you can see building the test collection is the first step. Lots of different types of tests that you can write. But the title of this test is not testing, it's continuous testing. So we know how to write a test. How do you continuously test your APIs? Okay, so let's go back to Postman. Hopefully you see Postman. So we're done with this template for now. If you want to go ahead and pull in a different template called Postman Echo, remember you go to the orange button, tab over to templates, and then just type in Echo, and then pull that collection in. I already have Postman Echo locally, so I'm not going to pull that in. But this is that service that Postman has that just echoes back what we send it. So let's go ahead and take a look at Collection Runner again. So we just ran the baby collection that was Bitcoin and Echo, 2 requests. Now we have a heftier collection. Let's go ahead and run it. Boom, 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 boom. So in this case, oh, we have some tests that are failing. How long is this? Okay, that finished. So somebody wrote 83 tests that passed and 7 that failed. So if I want to drill down, I can go ahead and filter by the test that failed, and I can go ahead and see what the assertion error is, as well as we mentioned before, drill down into what was sent. And one other thing that I do want to show you here is the console. We'll take a look at this in a bit, but the console, there's a new interface for this, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It's glued to the bottom, and you can break it out if you want, but I really like that. So you can see the network requests that were sent from Postman. So if I go ahead and expand this one, I can see information about the request, the response, and this is the pretty view. You can also see the raw view, as well as any log statements. If you're logging something for more visibility, or you're inspecting an object and you're like, I don't understand why I'm getting that bug, you can go ahead and log it here. So this is I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I'm going to go ahead and close the collection runner. So we know that this test runs, and we have 7 failures. And if we had more time, we'd fix those, fix it so that these weren't failing tests. But I don't have time. I want to get to the CI/CD demo with Trent. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to export this collection. I'm going to export it as JSON. So I already have one locally, so I'm not going to click the export button, but feel free to do this. Just remember where you saved it so that you can run it. You're going to export this collection called Postman Echo as a JSON file. Okay, it's time to go to, do you know where we're going next, Trent?
We're going to me? Is it my turn?
No, not yet, but do you know what? I've just exported a JSON file.
Let me guess. We're going to start talking about our good friend Newman.
Yes, exactly. Ding, ding, ding. So I'm going to go over to my terminal, and I'm on a Mac. I'm on Z Shell, so just keep that in mind. I've already installed Newman. Here, let me go to a website actually. So this is what we're talking about. Good friend Newman, but if you're new to Newman, welcome. Newman is an open source project on GitHub that allows you to run collections from your command line. So it's a node package. You can actually use it as a node package. So if you're writing a script, you can require Newman and do stuff with it to run collections in your script. It's also a Docker image if you prefer the Docker. All you have to do, this is all I did. So I used npm, but you can brew install. Just install Newman. And so I've already done that. We'll drop a link to Newman in the chat too if you want to all eyes over to chat. So I've already installed it. I'm on version 5. And I'm in a directory called Postman demos, and I've already exported this Postman echo collection. It's a static JSON file that's sitting in my directory, and I can go ahead and run that JSON file that is here in my directory. So when I hit enter, I see the CLI output. Here's, it's exactly what I saw in Collection Runner, except with a black background. And then at the very end, you can see the requests running, the tests responses, and here's that summary. So remember, we had 7 failures, and here's like a nice summary of that. So this is how I can run Newman from the command line, and is actually foreshadowing for Trent's part, where you're going to be doing something very, very similar.
That's right.
So I think if I remember correctly, you're going to be showing the Postman API.
That's one of the demos, yep.
One of the demos. So
yeah.
I'm going to show you, we're running it with a static JSON file, but if I replaced the static JSON file with a call to the Postman API, and a lot of people don't know there's a Postman API. I wonder how long I should go into. I won't show you how to get the collection, but I will point to the Postman API. So I'm back in Postman now. If you want to pull this in, go ahead to the new button. And instead of tabbing over to templates, this time tab over to API network, search for Postman, and pull in that collection. So that's our public API. I've already pulled it down here. So I'll start and bring it to the top. So the Postman API is a way that you can programmatically access all of your Postman stuff. So what you would do is you would get all your collections, find the UID for that, get a single collection, and then this. Oh, if I don't want to reveal anything. Okay, I think that's empty. So this is the URL that you would be using. Clearly, these double curly braces are placeholders for actual values that you would want to have. And so if I go ahead and run that from my command line, instead of Newman run JSON file, it's Newman run that full URL. And if you're using an environment like I imagine you probably are, if you're doing testing at any real scale, then you would just add E and then put either the JSON file for the environment or the API call. So the way I like to describe it, and I'm curious how, we'll talk about this more a little bit later, Trent, during the demo of Jenkins, but I like to tell people that if your collection is baked, your tests are baked, no one has touched it in many, many moons, go ahead and export a JSON file. It doesn't matter, nothing's changing. If people are actively working on it, you don't want to have to export that JSON file every single time. So pull the latest version by API. And if people are actively working on it, go ahead and fork it. Go ahead and create a fork so that you're not like merging stuff into the main production version of that API. Okay. So Newman's super cool. People love it. People always ask why you called it Newman. Trent, why did we call it Newman?
So at least the story that I've come to know is that all of our counterparts in India are big fans of Seinfeld. And so as we know, Newman is a postman on Seinfeld, and I'm a big fan of Seinfeld. Like I literally watch it like almost every night because they have reruns on every night, and it never gets old to me. But so Newman's the postman. So when we were creating this tool, the idea came up that we'll have to give it a name. So of course we went with Newman, the postman from Seinfeld. So that's the story that I've known. Some people think it is named after one of our engineering managers, Newman, but it's not named after him. At least, like I say, this is the story that I'm told.
Yeah.
It could be all for naught. Maybe they're just messing with me. I don't know. But that's the story that I've come to know.
Yeah, that's what I know too. And it sounds like the chat already knew that joke. There's a lot of duh in the chat.
Yeah. And I can see a bunch of people, like, even though we can't actually see them, they're all sitting there going, Newman. Just like Jerry always does.
Newman. Okay, so we just used Newman, the postman in Seinfeld. We just used Newman to run the collection from the command line. And we said, yeah, it's a node package. If you want to run your own script, you can create a cron job and run this collection at whatever interval you want, right? So make your own cron job if you want. But one thing that Postman offers, one more thing. Do you know what I'm going to talk about next, Trent?
I don't know. Surprise me.
Okay. So you can either roll your own cron job, or you can use a Postman monitor. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and unstar Postman API. Let's go back to Postman Echo. Oh, actually, let's go to DNS checker. I really like this. I didn't write this collection, but it's a really nice example of a collection that does something else. So we've been talking about test suites. This is a domain name system checker. So you can see all the different calls that will run in sequence because that's how they wrote the code. And if I want to run this every 5 minutes, every hour, every week, whatever, I can go ahead and create a monitor. So once again, click that flyout. And if you tab over, there's a little tab thing here, tab over to monitors. I already have a DNS checker, but let's go ahead and see what it looks like to create one from scratch. So what we're doing now is creating a new monitor on the DNS checker collection. So click add monitor, give it a name, version tag, if you're using an environment. The real thing to focus on here is the monitor run frequency. This is where you can schedule the collection to run from Postman servers every 5 minutes, right? So I think that's the most narrow increment of time. Or you can run it like every week or however you want to. Let's see, what are all the, I haven't seen this in a while. So you can go ahead and schedule it, set it and forget it, I like to say, and then automatically select your region. But if you have customers in multiple regions, you can go ahead and select different regions. Just know that the monitor will run for each of those regions. And then there is the ability to set a static IP. I think this is a paid plan feature where if the endpoints that you're trying to hit are in a virtual private network or somehow unreachable, you can go ahead and whitelist traffic coming from a specific set IP. And then I'm just going to show this link here. I expanded show additional preferences. So what happens is if you run a monitor and there's a failure, like a failed test, then you'll receive email notifications. There's actually some enhancements with the retries that are fairly recent. So it's the same thing as you writing your own cron job to run from your own servers versus Postman monitors will run from Postman Cloud. So, so that's how I'm not going to create it because you already saw I have a monitor already. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now I'm in the browser. I'm in Chrome right now. I'm logged in. This is a private view. You can see that I set this up the other day, and here's all the runs. It looks like I was running it. I'm not good at math. Every X amount of minutes. And if I'm like, oh, what the heck? So I'm going to scroll back in time. Oh, it's too much to scroll back. I'm like, what happened here? There's a spike, right? All my tests passed. I'm happy with that. But maybe there is an infrastructure change or something that wasn't related to my test. I can go ahead and click that. And in the bottom, you see this familiar output. This is very similar to what we saw in the collection runner. So you can go ahead and drill down here. But what I want to call your attention to is a console log. So we already looked at the console in the Postman app, but this is the console for monitors. So if you have monitor failures and you receive an email notification, you can come here and dig a little bit deeper into what's going on. So monitors, there's 3 ways to run collections, run your tests, and monitors is the last way. Anything else to say about monitors? I feel like we don't get too many questions on it, but it's pretty powerful out of the box.
Yeah, it is really powerful. And, I have to be honest, like I don't use monitors enough, I think, but I think it's really important to some people's workflow that like you can use monitors just like as the name implies, like to keep an eye on things or to execute, on some sort of schedule just to ensure, stability, things are working, stuff like that. So it is really powerful. And like I say, I don't leverage it enough myself, and I really should. So it's definitely a very powerful feature.
Yeah, exactly. You can run health checks, you can run security checks, you can run anything in an ongoing scheduled manner. The only monitor that I still have running is one to water my plants. So the first request goes to a soil moisture sensor, and then it's like, oh, too dry. Then it goes to the next request, water the plant. And I just schedule it to go like every Monday through Friday, like check, whatever. You should build something like that, Trent.
Totally. Oh, yeah, I have too many side projects as it is, so like I don't need any more. But like this is a great example of like, Postman's not always just for work related things, right? Like we can do lots of fun different things with Postman as well. So
What do you mean? Watering my plant is work.
it depends on how many plants you have, how big it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
You should like doing that, shouldn't you?
Yeah. Well,
Isn't that supposed to be therapeutic and relaxing?
see all my plants? These are not the ones that get watered on a monitor. Okay, so hopefully, do you see my slides again?
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Awesome. Okay, so we're back in the slides. We talked about 3 ways to run tests. And I keep saying run tests, but it's really 3 ways to run collections, right? So I've heard about people using collections to do data migration, using collections to teach other people how to generate reports, how to script anything that you want. Anything that relies on APIs, you can script that workflow in a collection. So these are 3 ways to run those collections in Postman. The collection runner, which is in the app, Newman, which is from the command line or as a node package in a script, and monitors from Postman servers. So those are the 3 kind of like takeaways from this section. So nice. Ooh, collection runner. Newman. Aha, monitors. Okay. So we have the beginning of our definition for continuous testing. We talked about writing tests, potentially full-fledged test suites, and now we can automate any kind of custom workflow that we want. So now we know how to run collections. How can we automate this as part of our CI pipeline? I keep foreshadowing it, but we'll come up on that in just a little bit. Let's go back to our API testing pipeline. So still more, we busted out of that rut of just debugging, just exploring, and now we've actually written a test, we've written a test collection, hopefully. And now you can run those tests on demand with the collection runner or with Newman, and you can run tests ongoing with monitors. So how do you know when something's breaking? So the last component of continuous testing is observability. We already saw a few ways to observe and analyze what's going on, but what is observability in Postman? So I'm not gonna go over, just for the sake of time, I'm not gonna go over some of those outputs again, but we already saw the monitoring dashboard, the monitoring analytics, that graph with the spike. We saw the monitoring console. We also saw the console in Postman, which is pretty powerful. Newman, something that we didn't talk about, but we might take a look at just at a very high level in your section, is just reporters. So when I showed Newman from the command line and I was executing it, you saw the CLI output. But if you wanted to pipe that output into an HTML file, you could add a custom reporter, HTML. If you're using JUnit and you want that as the output, you can add the JUnit reporter. Like there's different community contributed reporters for Newman. All right, so let's go ahead and pop over to, I want to talk about integrations. So I think everything that we've talked, everything that we've talked about so far is available on the free plan, except for the static IPs for the monitors. I think everything else is available on the free plan. The next thing that I will talk about is integrations. So let's navigate there. And I will say that these are paid team plan features. It's very, very limited on the free plan. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you where to go for that. There's a few ways to get there. We've been on this build mode I'm here at the bottom right, but let's go ahead and toggle over to browse. And we see all the stuff that is inside this continuous testing workspace, and tab over to integrations. So click that, and then you'll actually go over to, oh no, I jacked up my Chrome. You'll go over to the dashboard. So I'm logged in here. This is the private view. It looks very similar to the Postman app. These are the built-in integrations that out of the box, if I use Datadog, I can go ahead and with a few clicks, you just do the consent, the mutual consent, and then Datadog, all my monitor failures or like whatever analytics I have going on will be piped into Datadog. So there's a couple different families of integrations, if you will, and we're talking specifically about observability and analytics. So for notifications, I know a lot of people ask about like PagerDuty, who's on call. Postman engineering uses Slack quite heavily. So there's a few different integrations for Slack that just pipe in monitor failures or pipe in activity that's going on in your Postman team. So one family of integrations is notifications. And then the other one is probably, that's relevant for this webinar, is probably analytics. So you have like CoreLogix, Datadog. I think the Postman engineering team uses CoreLogix quite a bit. That pipes it into your whatever analytical tool that you want. And if you don't see your favorite tools here, there's always the Postman API. So that was the Postman API that we looked at earlier, a way to programmatically script your own solution. So integrations is a paid team feature, very limited at the free level. One more aspect that I wanted to show you, but I need to. So the one last thing I did want to show you is actually an enterprise feature. So don't get too excited unless you're on the enterprise feature. And because I wasn't on an enterprise account, I can't show it to you in my interface. But that's the reporting. So something that some very big companies are curious about is how are people using my endpoints? And actually from the public side, that is all available. If you have a public API, you can see that in the API network that we saw earlier. But this is Trent. Trent, you've been spending a lot of time on this endpoint, and now I can kind of see it. You've been debugging, so now I see a big like spike in activity, or what's going on, like what are my most used endpoints. So internally with your Postman team, that's what this reporting is. All right, let's see. Oh, okay. So now we're completing our description of continuous testing. We talked about different ways to test as part of your continuous integration pipeline, also ways to ongoingly test. And now we're adding observability on top of that with monitoring and logs, as well as integrations for alerting and analytics. Okay, so one last slide. Let's go back to our API testing pipeline, and we filled in all the white space. So by the time you are running tests continuously and on demand, you have these integrations for analytics and alerting, and all of this drives a feedback loop. So when something's breaking and you have an insight in a weird spike in activity, these all feed back into the API development lifecycle, and you can debug a little bit faster. You can increase your test coverage, and that's the value of this API testing pipeline. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look, Trent, at one of the advanced workflows. What does it look like to run tests as part of your CI/CD pipeline? So let's go ahead and Trent, to your screen.
All right, perfect. I'm going to see if I can take over the screen here and if it works properly. And also I'm going to have to move some stuff out of the way because Zoom just throws everything right in the current view where I don't want it. All right, perfect. So I think everybody should be able to see my screen. You can see it, Joyce? All good?
Yep.
Perfect. And also I'm like looking at you guys now, so it's a little better view. Yeah, so basically I have this kind of quick demo set up. And so I've done this demo a few times before, but a couple things I want to talk about first before we kind of get into the demo itself. So I have this set up running on my local machine, and I want to keep it kind of really basic. So the config that we're looking at and what you're seeing on your screen right now is just as vanilla as it kind of gets with Jenkins. I picked Jenkins because it's what I know best and what I've worked with for years. But of course, a lot of these concepts and some of the stuff we're going to do would work with any of the popular like CI/CD tools, Circle CI, Travis, things of that nature. And also I'm using like a really simple collection and environment file, which kind of, goes back to like some of the demos that Joyce had shown you earlier in this webinar. So I have 3 jobs that I want to go over, and they kind of build off of one another. And, like I mentioned, this is like, Jenkins out of the box, but there's a few things that I have installed locally as well. And this would also apply to any nodes that you have running. So in some larger orgs that aren't running on local machines, if you're running on some servers or cloud-based systems, things like that, there's some prerequisites that you need to have on the nodes that execute these things. So the first thing, obviously, I have Jenkins installed on here. Next is I have Newman installed, and that goes back to Joyce kind of showed you where to find information about installing Newman and the actual like line to install it. So I have that installed, and then also because part of this demo, I'm using Docker, so I have Docker installed locally as well. So let's jump into the first demo here, and this is probably as basic as it gets. So I'll set this up a little bit. That this is like Newman is installed locally, and I'm basically just taking the Newman run command and executing as part of a CI/CD pipeline. And so however you want to trigger these builds is really up to you and the way you have systems configured and how you want to trigger these sorts of things. But let's show you the configuration for it. And as I mentioned before, this is all like just kind of like out of the box, basic Jenkins stuff. There's nothing funny happening here. I don't even have any plugins installed on this. So kind of what you see is what you get outside of the
most vanilla Jenkins.
It's as basic as it gets, which is good, right? Because that's what we want to show is the value in this without all the extras and bells and whistles. And you can really like build these out to be really great with some additional extras. So the piece that we want to focus on here is that we want to execute a shell command as part of our build process for this job. And as you can see on your screen, it is really as basic as it gets. So it's just the Newman run command. And then I'm passing in, as you can see here, I have a folder, of course, that contains my collection and then also the flag for the environment. And so I'm passing in the environment file. And so this collection, it's like 4 simple calls. I think it's like a get, post, put, and delete or something like that. I did these a long time ago, so please forgive me. And then also the environment file. I think all I have in there is like a URL, but it serves the purpose that we want to see here. I'll just hit save to get out of this. And so I'm going to hit the build now button, and these things run extremely quick. And so I try and catch the console output when it's running, but chances are it's going to go so quick that by the time I navigate to it, it'll already be complete. But we can look at the CLI output. That's kind of the key. So I'll hit build now, just so you know that there's nothing funny happening. We see build 10 happening. And if I go quick, no, it's already done, of course. So this is the console output, similar to like what you saw Joyce talk about and kind of demo a little bit with Newman. So what I want to highlight here is, what I'm highlighting right now on the screen is that's the actual CLI command that was part of that build steps. You see it running plain as day. And you can see my collection that ran, like I say, the 4 simple commands. I was right, it was a get, post, put, and delete. And then also the summary we see at the bottom, exactly the same as what Joyce had demoed before. And you can see, if there are any failures, what executed, the time it ran, and things like that, and that it was successful when it finished. So these are good pieces of information and stats to be able to keep an eye on as well, just to get an idea, like if you're running any sort of test where you notice that there's fluctuations in some of these things, they're really good indicators as to what may be happening and in some cases, the health of your system. So that in itself, that's like as basic as it gets in a CI/CD sort of pipeline. So we're going to build on that, and we'll take a look at the next job in line here. And I'm going to go into the configure. Same as the last one, all just out of the box vanilla stuff, nothing special happening here. But we have additional build commands as part of it. And so this kind of ties into what Joyce was talking about and using the Postman API to get information. And so one thing that I think is very important for people to remember, as some people use Postman just as an individual or on the free tier and stuff like that, where you're not collaborating with people, usually like the risk is very low of your collections and things getting out of date. But if you're starting to collaborate and use, more advanced workflows and our workspaces and your team starting to grow and things like that, and you have more people working on these, you want to make sure when you run these pipelines that you're running the latest and greatest versions of your collections. And so that's why I thought it was important to talk about using the Postman API in here. And so as part of these commands, I'm using a curl command, which is a pretty standard library that I think most popular operating systems have out of the box. So there's nothing additional you need to do. But one thing I do, actually a couple things I want to point out as part of this. So we'll talk about this first build step here. So I'm making a curl command to our Postman API, and you can see I'm actually honing in on the environment itself. And I'm passing in the UUID that is specific for the environment that I'm working with. And I'm passing in my API token. And so as you can see here, because this was something I actually previously had exposed, I just popped it in there. But one thing that is sometimes important, especially when you get into larger teams, is some of this information is proprietary and you don't want to be sharing this with larger teams or anybody that may see this. So I'm just actually replacing the variable for API token with the actual value. And I'll show you that config that I have. There's lots of different ways you can accomplish this in Jenkins and other CI/CD systems. But I thought it was important to kind of point this out for security reasons and things like that. But on top of that, like, so when I make this call, if I was just to go into a command line and make this call as it is, it's just going to return back a page with a bunch of JSON information on it. So what I'm doing there is I'm taking all that information from that curl call and I'm actually piping it into a JSON file that will then be local, in this case to my machine, but it would be local to the node that this is getting built on. And
hey, Trent,
the second, yeah, sorry.
How come you're using a build step how come you're using curl to pipe that into a local file instead of just using the full URL in the main Newman run command?
So you can do things like that, but what we want to do is pull these things down locally, and it's really kind of up to users' preferences. So there are obviously different ways we can approach this. So for me, I like to pull these things down locally, especially if they're large files and things like that. And also for debugging later on, potentially, you want to see what was pulled down as part of that run, because it actually does save these as artifacts on the node after the fact. And in some cases, you can clean this up after, and you can, there are flags for this, but I don't want to get too off track on it. But basically, like, you can wipe out your workspace on every build so that those files are gone, or you can see if there's a diff between them and pull them down. But you want to be able to kind of have a bit of a history there to see what those files look like. So if there is any concern or data corruption or anything like that, this is my preferred way. But Joyce, you're very right. Like, that is a way you can do it as well. You can pop it right in on the run command itself. But I like this because it breaks it out and allows me to kind of piecemeal it a little bit, especially if there's additional build steps you may want in there that will like do some data manipulation or setup and things like that. So this is my preferred way. But yeah, like, there are obviously different ways we can approach this. That's definitely a really good question. So the next step, it's very similar to the very first step, except for all I'm doing is I'm pulling in the collection and I'm passing in the UUID for this specific collection we're working with. And same as the last one, we're doing variable replacement for the token, so I don't expose it. Mind you, I'll show you that I will still expose it in the console output. But we're also piping this into another JSON file that's specific for the collection. And the last step, very similar to what you saw in the demo one, it's the Newman run command, except for all I'm doing is I'm passing in that collection file that you see from above into the JSON file, and then the environment itself that we piped in from the very first call up above. And I will execute this like last one. Same thing, it's probably gonna run really quick. And so by the time I actually get to the console, it'll probably be, it'll be done. But we'll hit build now and see how quickly we can get to it. Oh, it's still running. Awesome. I don't know if there was a lag in the presentation either, so maybe you guys didn't catch that, but either way, we can go over it. So here in all its glory is my API key. Don't get any thoughts here, guys. I'm going to delete this when this is over, and there's really nothing in there special. It's just this collection, so you're not going to get access to any like special information or anything. But this is the curl command that was in that first build step. As you can see, it was hitting the environments and pulling it down, and it gives stats around this because that's pretty typical curl responses. And the same here, there's the second step where we're pulling the collection in and all the information around that. And then lastly, what I'm highlighting here is that third and final build step, that Newman run collection and the environment file that we're passing in. And same as the first demo, before calls happen, our summary happens down here with any relevant information to that run. And that in itself is basically how we use Postman API to pull down the latest versions of things. And so this is key as your systems start to mature and your teams start collaborating and things like that. You want to make sure you have the latest versions. Or once we start getting into like forking and stuff like that, the more advanced workflows, this stuff kind of becomes a little more critical in my opinion.
Nice.
And so I have one last demo. So this kind of builds on top of those other two as well, but this is where we layer in Docker. And so I'm gonna look at the configuration here as well. Once again, preface this with out of the box, vanilla, plain Jane Jenkins, nothing special, nothing up my sleeves, nothing to see here. But so here we actually have 4 build steps. So same as the previous one, I'm pulling things down from our API. So this is building upon from demo 1 into demo 2 and then into this third demo, piping it into a JSON file. Same with collections, that's the second build step, piping it into that JSON file. But these last 2 steps are the new steps that we want to focus on. So the third step in here is I'm pulling down the latest Docker image. So we have a Postman Newman image, and you can also like pass in the versions and stuff like that. But I don't want to get into the specifics around Docker and how it works and versioning and all that. So we're pulling down the latest version of the Postman Newman image locally. And so this would be running on my machine locally or on the node that this would be executing on if you have larger systems. And the last step, this is where like all the fun happens. So I'm issuing the Docker command and passing in the Newman run command, as you can see right here, and I'm passing in the collection. And I'm using the more explicit flags here just for these demo purposes, but you can do like -e. But we're passing in the environment. So that's the environment file that we pulled down from the API and piped into that file. And so here, and I'm only doing CLI, but you can do other ones like HTML, JSON. I think we do CSV as well, don't we, Joyce? I think those are and like JUnit.
And one of our famous ones, our very own Danny Dainton, has HTML extra with dark mode now. Yes,
a good plug for Danny, who's a member of our quality team as well. I think he has a bit of a celebrity status with our user base. He has created this fantastic HTML extra reporter, which is like super popular. I think he's like well over 120,000 downloads on that. So definitely check that out if you have an opportunity. But for this purpose, I'm just doing CLI like we did with the previous ones. And so I have a couple extra flags in here, the color off and the disable Unicode. These aren't always needed. I'm popping these in here because it kind of messes with the output from the Jenkins CLI. So I want to keep this as readable as possible, but also like you can accomplish things by pulling in additional plugins and stuff like that that'll help with this. And you can make it as pretty as you want, sort of thing. But I like just kind of keep things basic and stuff like that. And that's all there is for this config. So I'll hit save here and we'll run it. And usually I can catch this one when it is actually executing. So we'll hit build now and we'll grab that, especially if there's a new image. So this one is, we are catching it as it's running. Hopefully you guys are seeing this on your end.
Yep.
I'm going to scroll back up to the top so you guys can see what's happening. Same as the last one. Here's our API calls to pull down the environment. Here's the API call to pull down the collection. And here's the Docker pull command. Now, if there's a new image that's available, or it's the very first time that you're pulling this down, you'll actually see a lot more information here. Very similar to what you'd see if you ran this via just normal command line on your machine. You'd see a lot more information. But because I ran this before the demo to ensure that it was a smooth demo for you guys, I have the latest image running locally. And then right here, we can see that last build step that executed. So the Docker run command, and we're passing in some information here. but we'll focus in on the Newman run command, which is the later part of that. So we're passing in the collection, the environment, and then those additional flags for the reporters, color, disable, so on and so forth. And just like the other two demos, you see the 4 calls that happen and the summary output as a result. Luckily, these things are small and easy. I guess I could make them a little more complex, but so there's more to see. But it was a successful run, no fails, no issues, no concerns at all. Before I wrap this up, though, I did want to kind of touch upon like my configuration, because I know some people may have questions. I know, Joyce, you had questions about this when we kind of initially did the dry run. I did have that API key in there, and she's like, well, how would you hide that? And I was like, oh, I never thought about it, but it's a very good question. So I did kind of want to touch upon it a little bit and just kind of show you guys like what I was doing, because it was the only thing that was a deviation from you know, the original setup that we've done and other demos that I've done in the past. And so this is very specific to Jenkins. Honestly, I don't know 100% how you do this with like Travis or Circle CI or some of the other systems.
It's all very similar.
But I've created, is it? Okay, yeah, I haven't worked enough with those, to be honest with you. I think maybe in upcoming webinars and stuff, maybe we'll like focus on some of these other tools or do like a larger one about this, because I think some of our viewers would really enjoy it. So I just created a variable, an environment variable in the global config of Jenkins, put my API key in here and saved it, and then we just use that as part of it. So I just want to show that because I thought it was important, and I know that we do sometimes get questions about these things. And every system does this a little differently. This is probably not the best way to do it. As I say, there are lots of plugins, I think, that would solve this problem a lot better and address it. But for the demo purposes, I think this shows what you guys would want to know. And so with that, that's all I have about this demo.
Trent, can you go back to that screen with the 3 options?
When you say 3 options, are we talking about this one?
Yeah. So when would you use like each scenario? Like what have you seen people choose? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so like the way I built this out was to have these 3 different scenarios, generally because they are somewhat representative of like a system as it grows and matures and things like that. So the very first one where it was just like totally local, I'm running Jenkins local, or I have a server sitting beside my desk. I'm a startup and I'm bootstrapping things and getting up and running. I don't have a ton of money. I don't have a lot to invest in, you know, some of these big, large systems and stuff like that. But I do want to have like a CI/CD system. Now I know there's lots of third-party systems out there that have free tiers and stuff like that, but this I find like gives you the most control. So the first one of running it local, I think, is like, you know, as basic as you can get, where you're putting it on some sort of a schedule or a cron job, or you can run it at will. But we can also accomplish the same thing using just Postman itself. But this is kind of like the primer for getting us set up for larger orgs and things like that. And so then that kind of steps into the second demo that we did, where we're starting to use the Postman API, because you're probably going to get to a point where there's a lot more collaboration happening, especially in these COVID times where everybody's remote. I think this is, you know, very effective. So you're going to have team members that could be, you know, literally a world away sort of thing, working on these things. You're working, you know, in sync with them, but you want to make sure that, you know, you are executing against the latest changes that you need to execute for. And so we're pulling it down from our own internal Postman API to have them to be up to date. So that's kind of like the next step I see, and it drives collaboration and things like that. And the third one is kind of a combination of number 2, and then like the next step as you kind of grow your org and things like that, where you're starting to look at containers and stuff like that. And I know for the longest time, at least in my experience, containers was something that like larger enterprises would only use or know. But I think nowadays, like containers are coming to the point where I actually have friends that like will run their home systems, you know, maybe their audio, video, or security or whatever it is, and they run it totally in a like a container-based system, because I think these systems have matured to that point where you can do that. But the idea here was that you're kind of using that container-based system where, like, you know, you have something that comes up, does the work, and then shuts down. Especially if you're going to run it in some sort of a cloud environment where you can incur costs around running these systems. So you are only paying for what's being run and executed and then pulled back down again. So you're not incurring tons of costs. So I thought this was important to kind of walk through a bit of a life cycle here, and where these 3 different demos would apply and what I've seen myself.
Yeah. I'm always surprised at how many people are using containers nowadays. It's just like table stakes.
Yeah, well, like you and I were talking about, is just like having some fun with like Raspberry Pis and like I think we're talking about like Kubernetes and stuff like that, and like
Yeah,
what little projects like we can all kind of get together and play around with, and how we can
yeah.
use Postman to drive those. Like, yeah, you're exactly right.
Okay, so let me try to take this back from you.
Okay, see if it works. Hey, it did.
Hopefully, do you see my screen?
I see your screen. It worked perfect,
Okay, awesome.
just like we practice.
Okay, okay. All right, so that was an example of CI/CD in Jenkins, but as Trent, you mentioned, this is very similar to how it works with any of the major tools. You run your tests, you have a build time script, and you're using Newman in three different ways. Let me go back to that, three different ways to run it, so pick your flavor. Um, and let's go ahead and recap some of what we've talked about already. So again, this is not an intro to testing. So if you're curious about that, go ahead and look up, we will show you some resources for the syntax of tests and also like the primer. And continuous testing automation is not just about test automation, but any kind of automation. So anything that you could do with APIs, from running reports to capturing data, whatever you can imagine, you can automate it. And one of those advanced testing flows is continuous integration. And you showed a way to do it with a static JSON file, but also using the Postman API, which is the best practice if you're collaborating with the team, if there's a lot of changes going on with the API or the tests. Some other advanced testing workflows that we didn't show besides continuous integration, not everyone has a CI pipeline, is different types of tests. We kind of like showed some of that, but we're not diving deep into integration or end-to-end tests or even security checks and health checks. But those are some more advanced testing workflows. We talked about this at the very beginning, but we didn't show it, mock servers. So using mocks to stub out external dependencies so you can focus on the system under test. And consumer-driven contract tests. So if you're a microservices architecture, how do you release things confidently, making sure that you're not breaking something for a consumer? So a lot of different types of tests. Trent, I know you're a lot more involved in the testing community than I am. What other kinds of advanced testing workflows have you seen that I think people might be curious about?
Yeah, so some of like the more advanced like testing workflows and pipeline stuff that I've seen, like we can do something as simple as I demoed and things like that. But like some of the like, larger kind of more fully automated systems, like you can have these execute on like a monitor or some sort of a cron job and things like that, like which kind of keeps a pulse on what's happening and the health of your systems, and having those tests run regularly, whether it's against development environments or production or whatever it may be. But you can also have these things triggered as part of like a commit or a merge, or before you release to your production systems, or post-release smoke tests, all these sorts of things. But some of the like really advanced ones that I've seen, the Jenkins jobs or the CI/CD jobs, like are very elaborate, where they will pull down a repo, they will build the service under test locally, they will deploy it to, and this can all be done in a container as well, by the way. It'll deploy it to that container or that environment, and then execute these collections. And then in some case, if you're starting to use some of the more advanced features of like Newman and stuff like that, that you'd be able to use like some of the reporters, and whether you store them locally or you integrate it with some sort of like a reporting system and things like that, you can start to plot some of this information and see these trends over time of how your tests are doing, what your coverage is, things like that. So really, like the way we have Newman built and the way these CI/CD systems work, like really the sky is the limit, I believe, in some of these cases. So you can go super basic like I demoed, or you can go really big. And so anybody can use these things. So like really, I don't think there's any org out there that couldn't use something like this.
Yeah. I used to think that I was teaching like the best practices for testing, but now, especially because containers are so popular, I think that might be the new best practice, because containers allow you to, yes, set up, tear down very cleanly, but also exactly replicate the test environment. So it's just very realistic, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also like containers are transient too, right? So like they can move anywhere. You can do this locally, and then as your setup and config grows, like then you move it to a cloud system or maybe a server-based system and things like that. And it will act hopefully the exact same on one system as it would on another, and so on and so forth. So that's the great part about that. And then also one thing, Joyce, like I think you talked about was like mocks, and it kind of made me think of something I did want to mention is like when we're doing mocking these days, I think for any companies that are doing like API first design, mocks, in my opinion, are very key. And I'll tell you the why that is the when you're creating a new feature or something and you're working on your API, your developers can go off and start coding and things like that, but you can also go off and start writing tests. And because you have some sort of spec you're basing off of, because you're API first, you have agreed upon this contract or this agreement that you're going to go against. And so therefore we get away from that whole like, and I don't want to say waterfall because it could still be agile, but you're not left waiting for some product or API to be developed so you can go and test against, because you know what that API looks like, you know what the endpoints are, what they should be returning and things like that, that you can actually start mocking out some responses and then start writing your tests against that. And then you get into like the pre-request scripts, the test scripts, and the actual calls themselves. And so that kind of maybe falls into that like advanced workflow kind of question you had, Joyce, but it is something that like when I saw it on the slide, it made me think, oh damn, I gotta like mention that because I think a lot of our viewers would really find that interesting.
Yeah, our Postman engineering, that's how they do their consumer-driven contract test. They actually start the consumers write tests in parallel against the mocks before any actual code is deployed. So that is the single source of truth. The mocks are the single source of truth for the proposed behavior.
Yeah, and I think going forward, like this is going to be a practice that a lot of a lot of users are going to start to adopt because it just kind of makes more sense rather than having that waiting period in between development and quality executing on those things. You can really cut down your timelines and things like that.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that we have enough time for live questions because I know people tuned in for your test celebrity, Trent. So I'm going to go ahead and one more last shot at this. I won't even talk about this anymore. I've talked about this so many times, but I will talk about our aspirational testing pyramid. So this is the, not roadmap, but this is the potential. This is the potential for where you can go with testing with Postman, but not everyone is going to want to go to integration. Not everyone's going to want to go to automation the way we've talked about it. So I think it's really up to you to decide where is your organization. Again, a lot of people don't have continuous integration pipelines. Where do you want to be? And just know that all of this is possible. And to help you get there, we do have some resources that I want to point out. I think we dropped some of these links in the chat earlier, but the one that I will call out here is API network templates. So a lot of the examples that we used are in the API network, and there's test examples there, there's workflow examples there. And I would beg you, if you come up with an amazing example test, publish it there, share it with the rest of your Postman community. Okay, so some additional resources there. Also a plug for Postman is live streaming on Twitch now. So once a week, we hack on something and we build something together, but also once a month, if you wanted to see mocks demoed and you're like, oh, I really wanted to see mocks. Once a month, we have office hours on Twitch. That's live where you can just ask, hey, show me mocks, or I'm working on something with mocks. Here's a very specific question, help me with it. So that's once a month we have office hours. So feel free to stop by that. That's on Twitch at Get Postman. And before we go to live Q&A, I do want to get your browsers ready, everyone. Go ahead and fill out the survey. Go ahead to this bit.ly link, Postman Survey 7. You have the opportunity to win a stack of cash in one hand or a cube block in the other hand. I'm not sure what the prize is. It looks like it's an Amazon gift card or a stack of cash. So go ahead and enter that link into your browser and please give us some feedback. And this was intended to be continuous testing, but there's so many testing topics that we didn't cover. So this is your chance to provide that feedback so that we can program some content that is more, is really the next step for you. Okay, so on to the Q&A. Let's see. So I'm going to the Q&A. Do you see the Q&A, Trent?
I do. So
how do I see it?
We have it in Slack just for everybody that's still tuned in. We're looking at Slack. to try
No,
and
we're
find
supposed to
some of
go
these
to the
questions.
Q&A, but I literally can't see anything on Q&A. Here, wait, let me
Oh,
stop.
really?
Yeah, let me stop sharing my screen and then maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, so
I,
I do see them showing up now.
okay,
But there's like, we have like 29 of them, and I don't know how much time we have. Like, we have like 5 minutes left, right? Like,
go ahead and pick something off the top. Yeah.
okay, so let's grab the first one. Please let us know how to fetch environment variables generated dynamically in an iteration from Newman used as package. As far as I know, it's not possible except for the summary callback. Wow, that's a good one.
I can see the Q&A now. I can read it. Sorry.
Okay.
How
I
to
don't think
fetch
anybody's answered that
the
one.
environment variables generated dynamically. Yeah. So if you're, unfortunately, the dynamic part of it is just pretty ephemeral. So there's no teardown no unsetting that you'll need to do with dynamic variables. So if you were to save it, generate it and save it to any type of variable, then you would be able to call it. So we showed environment variable. If you want to keep it ephemeral, meaning you don't have to tear it down or unset it at the end, you can save it as a local variable. So you just need to be able to assign it to a variable so you can retrieve it. Oh,
Yeah. I was
did
gonna
you
say
see another one
one.
that was good? Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So one of them I saw here was like, would it be a valid concern to have a pre-scheduled test running, yet the author forgot about it? And so I'm trying to, I think if I understand this correctly, but like one thing that I've done in the past is I will have maybe I'll have a dedicated very first call set up in my collections that will do a bunch of data setup and things like that. So it's a pre-request setup that then facilitates the rest of the test. And I don't know if that's exactly what we're getting at, but and like if the author forgot about it, you'd be able to use like the console and stuff like that to be able to find that information to see what's happening, because you would see it generally execute in advance. But that's kind of just like a best practice that I do, whether that's best practice for everybody, but that's kind of how I approach it. And so I hope I answer that question correctly, if I understand it correctly.
I have a good question here. A lot of examples online or the snippets generally reference environment variables. Wouldn't it be safer to use collection rather than environment variables whenever possible? What do you think, Trent?
Yeah, that kind of comes down to like, I guess maybe a bit of a personal opinion or what fits for you. So in my experience, what I would use is environment variables, because then this collection can move from one environment to the next. And so maybe you only have one environment that you're working in, but then the next environment you set up, a bunch of that information is different and it's very specific to the environment. So to kind of go like along with the CI/CD examples that I was showing, each environment that I would execute against. So maybe I have a beta or a stage or a pre-prod and production and so on and so forth. And in some cases you set up more environments. It's easy just to use that exact same collection and just overlay it with whatever environment. And you say, okay, execute this exact same collection every single time against every environment. But we just got to pop in these environment variables that are specific. So usually things like URLs, API keys, things like that would be specific to the environment. So that's generally how I do it. If you're doing a collection level, then of course it's going to use those variables for every time it's run against any environment.
Yeah.
But it does make it easy to maintain too. Like,
and environments are portable, so you can use the same like login or whatever information config setup across collections. It just decouples it. One more good question I see here: how do you mock a response if the called service is down?
If we are mocking, if we're using Postman mock,
yeah. So I think
our service will never be down.
I think they're asking like if an external service is down. And just to be clear, when we're advocating using mocks to stub out external dependencies, it's really replacing that service call with a static mock. So it's basically like, you made this mock, you know exactly what's going to come back. You're not relying on this unreliable external service or even an internal service. You're not relying on another service. You're relying on the mock to come back at you.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question here. probably the last question. Is it possible to generate tests given an open API or other API specification?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Do you know the answer to that?
I do know the answer to that. Like you can you can generate tests. So in the Postman application, you can bring in your spec, whether it's open API or whatever it may be. You can bring it in and generate, test collections, documentation, monitoring, mocks. I'm probably going to forget something, Joyce. So you have to like fill in anything I forget. But yeah, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, and if you're, it's interesting to have an open API question. We do have dedicated webinars to for some of these topics that you're talking about. I think we're going to wrap up now. I do believe provide your feedback in the survey. We definitely want to program webinars that are interesting to you. And we also have previous webinars that you might be curious about. So we'll drop a link to that in the chat so you can take a look at the recording. But otherwise, we will be sending out a recording to everyone who registered. So thank you very much for stopping by. And if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, we'll try to pull something together so that we answer some of the more popular, frequently asked questions. Anything else you wanted to say to folks before we sign off, Trent?
I'm going to do another plug for the fact that I'm hiring SDETs and performance engineers. I need to do that. And then also we have a ton of open positions, both remote and in specific locations. So I got to do a plug for that as well. Please check out our website and take a look at our open positions.
Yeah, Postman is hiring like hotcakes right now. If anybody's, and I know some other businesses are suffering due to the economic conditions. So check out our jobs page. We are hiring like hotcakes. And I think that's all we have for you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye.